why don't you go ahead and give us a brief about, how have you been in this entire pandemic? How's been work, and what do you presently do, and where your interests lie? We just want to know about you, and it's going to be great for our viewers to know about you as well.
Absolutely. My name is Jean-Francois. You can call me Gene. Uh, I'm based in the Bay Area. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York City. Currently, I serve as the head of partnerships for Ingram Micro Commerce and Lifecycle Services.
Right.
This is the fulfillment and technology, e-commerce technology division of Ingram Micro that came out of the legacy Shipwire team. We were acquired by Ingram Micro back in December of 2013. I joined a couple months right after that to take on and lead sales for the organization. And now I lead partnerships, across the value chain for e-commerce. And I'm very proud to do so for this very big organization.
Oh, that must be great. So I saw your LinkedIn and I got to realize that you've had a lot of extensive experience working in various parts of the organization. I mean, you've worked in financial services, and then you've moved on to more collaborative roles where you're leading task force and things like that. So
Yeah.
how has been the journey for you so far? What are the learnings or insights there?
Well, being part of this particular organization, um, I've been fortunate because it's been focusing on helping e-commerce companies scale, right? Like the entire career, and it's really been about helping entrepreneurs and focusing on their needs across the value chain. So when we started off, I was actually a Shipwire customer. Uh, uh, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, I ran a small company called Baby Deserves Best. What we did was we were shipping, or at least attempting to ship, baby goods into Asia Pacific and from Canada and the U.S. And it was very expensive and time consuming, and it was hard to get. Logistics wasn't like it was today. Like it wasn't plug and play. So I signed up for Shipwire 8 years ago, and then I went to San Francisco to raise money, and I got to meet the founders, and they hired me to be the lead for outbound sales. So, long story short, it's a story of entrepreneurship, and even now, as the head of anti-racism task force, what we're doing is trying to empower not just our employees and operational facilities that focus on pickpacking for e-commerce, but those entrepreneurs that have been left behind, right? That haven't been getting any funding for their businesses, that haven't been getting scaled services to help them grow. So it's really about helping those and providing a resource platform for individuals that want to scale their businesses that may not necessarily know how to do so, but also for bigger, faster growing businesses that need that infrastructure.
Right. So I see that you've been involved with the entrepreneurial sector for a very long time, and as you say that you've worked in an area where you see these small startups and then you help them scale, or you provide them with the insights that would allow them to take their business to the next level. And I think that's amazing right there. So are there any so for viewers who have small startups or just starting out right now with their own independent businesses in COVID-19? So what would you think that has been the major mega trends right now in the pandemic since January or something that small startups need to be looking out for, in your opinion?
I think there's a phrase, and I appreciate the question. It's a good one. There's a phrase, uh, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that that's exactly where we are today, where you have this convergence of forces. I think it's not necessarily the five forces, Michael Porter's five forces, but this is a version of that where you have uh, technology has never been from a B2B perspective, technology has never been cheaper to operate a full-fledged like $1 million Shopify store probably cost you the same amount of money as a $5,000 Shopify store to run. So you have this accessibility piece with the affordability of the technology, but you also have the fact that I think over the last 7 months, ecom has grown by such a crazy percentage that you've never had more of an opportunity to get in the game and scale up as fast as you could have before. I mean, as fast today as you could have before. So I think it's definitely if I'm starting from scratch today, I definitely have an advantage than if I was starting a few months ago. Now, also, let's not pretend Facebook as an acquisition channel and all of these other acquisition channels, for some odd reason, the cost of acquisition has gone down in the last 7 months for ad spend, and especially if you own your media or you're spreading it around. So it's never been a better time to get in the game and try to acquire customers and build out your brand.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And given that I was reading this Bloomberg research in the morning, and it showed that the rise of new technological startups and in startups in general have sort of increased since February and March. Given now we're closing to the end of the year, and it has just skyrocketed the amount of businesses that are being launched right now. So in an area like that, I think your insights today will be extremely helpful for B2B and to an extent B2C customers as well. So the presentation that we're about to get into, what are the things that we could expect out of it, just for the viewers who might not understand stacking or something like that?
Well, I mean, my agenda is simple today. I think I'm going to go over the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains and why that's good for brands today. We're going to go about focus on the cons of traditional retail, the shift to online, and how to develop the technology stack that you really need, the 5 pillars of it that you need to play today in an omni-channel world. And finally, trying to focus on putting together a fulfillment network that's fault tolerant so that you can deliver that top of class customer experience.
Right. I think we're in for a treat then, and there's so much information condensed in the presentation. So why don't you just take us ahead and get started with it? It'll be great to go ahead. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me share my screen really
Sure.
quickly. Again, let's talk about the company. Ingram Micro helps companies scale, and we do this by providing 3PL services, but also technology for retail and dropship orders using a suite of advanced technology and a network of fulfillment companies. Like I mentioned before, I left finance about 2013 to join Shipwire after leaving New York and moving to San Francisco, and I haven't regretted it at all. And in today's agenda, we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains, the cons of traditional go-to-market strategies, why diversify your demand channels. We're going to go into the optimal e-com stack for omni-channel, as well as the fault-tolerant network design. So when I first gave this presentation, or put it together rather, I've been working on this for a couple of months. It was around my wife's birthday in May. And around that time, usually I would join the hordes of people or the droves of people who are scouring the perfectly curated shops of the mall for discretionary goods. But the truth is, commercial traffic is down and commercial real estate is preparing for what is forecasted to be the worst slump in recent years. Unemployment in the U.S. at least, I think globally, but unemployment in the U.S. at least is about down by a significant percentage. And these are all obviously signs of a slowing economy. But digital traffic is up by a significant percent. And the US, in fact, the US Commerce Department and the Bank of America teamed up on a research project that showed that e-commerce penetration as part of overall e-com has spiked in an aggressive way. Okay, so in 2009, e-commerce as part of overall sales represented about 5%. In 2019, 10 years later, e-commerce sales as an overall percentage of retail sales was about 16% of total growth, representing 11% year over year for 10 years. In the last 7 months, e-commerce sales as a percentage of overall sales have hit 27%, delineating an 11% jump in the last few months and weeks. So simultaneously, as retail sales drop to their lowest in a decade, e-commerce spikes to the most it's ever been. And that's pretty insane for such a short period of time. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's set the stage by understanding what was happening about 7 years ago. This is when the biggest CPG brands, those large national, multinational brands, were hearing rumors that big retailers like Walmart, like Macy's, were going to be phasing down the amount of inventory that they were carrying and the inventory that they were purchasing in bulk from these particular manufacturers and switching to more of a dropship model in order to lower the inventory on hand and be more aggressive in terms of margins. So these brands had a unique challenge. And what was that challenge? They were quite incapable of pivoting to a dropship model. Really, really they were. And the reason is twofold. They operated legacy systems that didn't allow for it. They couldn't differentiate between individual units in their OMS, their order management system, or in their inventory side. And the second thing is they never had implemented process workflows from a warehousing and logistics perspective that could support direct to consumer. And because these companies relied on capital efficiencies, uh, they weren't going to invest in those in the same way that they built those legacy systems, right? So this is when 2015, 2014, when drop shipping as a standard was still being defined. So fast forward to today, over the last few months, e-commerce growth has accelerated so much. It's presented a unique opportunity for brands to take advantage of. So let me get to my next slide. Um, Traditional go-to-market has, and that means retail go-to-market, has major gaps, right? By traditional retail, I mean businesses that largely rely on purchase orders, large bulk purchase orders, to drive revenue. And they've seen firsthand how they can be sidelined and frankly go bankrupt at a moment's notice. And beyond the intricacies of seasonality in any given category, the fact remains that if you're relying too heavily on POs or one distribution channel, to reach customers, your brand is at risk. Over time, we've seen three types of use cases. So the first is the digitally native brand. And digitally native brands that these are brands that are primarily going to market online as their branded channel, right? And by online, I mean their owned channel, right? So you think Parachute Home, you think Hims, think those types of brands, right? Brand equity is important to them. Owning the customer channel and the customer data is important to them. Customizing the customer experience so that they own that customer experience is important to them. So for these particular reasons, they may be hesitant to diversify their sales channels, right? Uh, the second group is national brands or multinational brands as well that have major retail distribution. Now, for these brands, let's not forget, the way they make money is by really arbitrage, right? Leveraging capital efficiencies to drive both revenue and profit. So they leverage massive POs and they invest in CapEx and OpEx on the infrastructure side. But these teams generally don't have the resources or the in-house experience to support an agile development of a direct-to-consumer experience, customer experience. So the last group we're talking about is the D2C licensing, fast growth entrepreneurs that are focusing on Amazon only as a channel. And this is the highest risk group. I mean, not the highest risk. National brands are probably the most highest risk. This is the second largest risk group. And it's because of the idiosyncratic risk of that one channel, Amazon. And you can see if you've ordered or placed an order on Amazon, if you're in the US or if you're in Canada, the shipping times for the last 7 months have been all over the place. So let me move on to the next slide here. So let's talk about diversifying your actual sales channels, right? And by this, I mean, let's talk about the four major online sales channels, or online versus offline. Um, why diversify your sales channels? Well, the obvious reason is because you can acquire more customers and obviously have more ways to market. And in 2020, the more touch points you have with your customer, the more opportunities you have. Is it still showing the screen?
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. You can continue. It's going well.
The more opportunities you have to tell your story. So why not take advantage of retailers and marketplaces and their customer acquisition mechanisms? So for branded e-com, this goes without saying, but this should be the primary touch point, right? It sets the tone for the customer experience across all channels. So digitally native brands like Glossier, like Bulletproof, like Parachute Homes have capitalized on this owned commerce experience. And it sets the tone for the rest of their channels. So in terms of marketplace and retail and dropship, no matter how you mix your D2C and retail.com channels, you need to develop a playbook and a system stack that allows you to switch back and forth between actually drop shipping for, let's say, non-peak season and consolidating inventory for peak season. Um, So what is the optimal stack, right? Why not build it in-house? Well, in my opinion, and this is, after, a couple years in the business, I would say that there are 5 layers in your stack that, and this is the bare minimum. Obviously, there could be a lot more, and you can have customized business workflows, but the front end demand channel. So let's say you owned uh, your inventory. So for me, let's say it's jean-francoispajamas.com, on Shopify, that would be my owned channel. And then maybe I'm selling on Target Plus and Walmart and Amazon. So all of those front end demand channels require specific order management orchestration. So you need an order management system that can be nimble enough to handle orders from multiple systems, but also consolidate those orders, and flag those orders appropriately based on the fulfillment requirements for the front end channel. So you also need a deep inventory management tool that can update your front end demand on inventory levels, on segmented inventory, on inventory by SKU, a load of variations according to your customer experience as well as the channel. Beyond that, you obviously need to fulfill the order. So that means going through a layer of fulfillment networks, and we'll talk about that a little bit after this slide. And lastly, uh, depending on the category, you should always have a returns tool capable of, seamlessly handling returns for your customers. Now, let's talk about fault tolerant network design. Selling across multiple systems and channels puts you in a position where you have to manage inventory in multiple locations. I'm assuming if you're doing it best in class. Beyond having customized business rules and systems that to adhere to the unique SLAs of your trading partners, you need to leverage a multi-nodal fulfillment network to provide a layer of inventory to prevent total outages in your network when demand spikes. So, other advantages of having multiple nodes is that if you have multiple nodes globally or locally or whatever, you will inherently lower your shipping costs by placing inventory closer to the end customer. That's a best in class practice. You obviously also decrease shipping times, which is excellent for the customer experience. So this leads to increased good standing with your trading partners. So those 3 strategies help brands scale. And these are basics about fulfillment that I think anybody uh, will tell you in the fulfillment space, or anybody that runs a large, fast growth brand will say, hey, these are best practices, and these 5 pieces of technology are kind of like the bare minimum for an optimal customer experience. So for me, I don't know. I'd rather I'm moving to the Q&A part of my presentation, but let me stop sharing my screen for a bit, hop back into the Zoom, and get some FaceTime with you, Shai.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so far it's been amazing. And I have this question regarding the fault tolerance network design you mentioned. So,
Sure.
with that, I actually wanted to have a sort of an idea experiment with you. So, in United Kingdom, there is a place called Milton Keynes where the first Amazon inventory house was established, and it's on the National M1 highway. And if you go all the way through, you'll see it's massive. Um,
Right.
in a situation like that, how does a big B2B business or a B2C business ensure that if their inventory touch point is located in one place, which is the most important nodule of all the distributions and everything like that, how do they also ensure the fact that it's not something that will become a weak chain or weak link in their entire in the entire process? Because if something goes wrong with that, it could possibly disrupt the entire chain of network. So how to ensure robust stability in a situation like that?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think that all comes down to 2 things or multiple things. The first would be, and let's remember that things like government shutdowns and just natural disasters and things happen, right? And you need to be able to be prepared for them. But they're also outliers, right? So you can't run your business according to them. But demand planning is obviously like the number one thing you're going to want to do, right? So your fast moving SKUs, meaning the SKUs that really make you money, the SKUs that are really flying off the shelves, that are even if they're loss leaders, They are crucial to the business. I would say you need a strategy to have those in multiple nodes that have what we call clusters. So let's say, the UK is a bit of a weird place simply because of, Brexit's happening. So you also have taxes and VATs issues with duties and taxes as well. So you got to keep that in mind in terms of profitability and shipping. But in terms of, like, let's say that didn't exist and it was just, open borders everywhere. What I would say is you would need to have your inventory, especially your fast moving inventory, in the customer clusters. So inventory in close to France, maybe not in Paris, but somewhere where it's low cost to fulfill, but also close enough to the large areas where you're shipping to.
Another question that sort we got, I mean, our Twitter is kind of blowing up. So we got this question regarding the fact that how does a B2B business, which is completely digital, so their entire process is digital. They've got a warehouse where the inventory is stored, and then they get receivings on their website or the orders on the website, and they just directly can connect the inventory house drop shipping service to their end customer. So
Right.
it's a traditional B2B online cloud setup. So in a situation like that, when how does a B2B business scale to a point where they could not only increase the number of warehouses they have, obviously that depends on sales, of course, I mean that's
Yeah.
revenue, but
Yeah.
beyond to a point where they could ensure more customer access in the first place, and at the same time how do they bring more sales in online in a condition where their inventory is not really up to the mark? So demand forecasting is the kind of thing that I
Yeah.
wanted to explore. How does a completely digital cloud-based business forecast demands?
That I I think we're all trying to answer that question, right? And fortunately, there are tools. I don't think unless you have a degree in statistics or whatever, and you want to put together a model in Excel, uh, there are tools that you can use if you're a completely cloud business to do that. One of them is Skubana. I'm not an expert on Skubana, but I am cool with the CEO, and I'm part as a head of partnerships for Shipwire. I work with them all the time. Um, there are these tools out there that can automate demand planning based on things like location, customer data, sales channel data, inventory levels. So for let's take a use case where you're completely digital, you're completely cloud, you're selling on 5 channels, you have 20 items, right? Let's say, or 20 SKUs, SKUs, unique, and inventories all over the place. Something like a Skubana will actually leverage their AI to automatically reorder, for example, for SKU B in Pennsylvania in the US because it's down and it shows that you're going to probably get 15 more orders in the next week for this particular SKU, right? Like that, I mean, that made that up, but there are tools that can help you with demand planning.
Right, that's good. So in the context of United States, where their states are interconnected in a way where their entire inventory model is laid out to ensure that whenever there is a shortage of supply, these demands could catch up if the inventory in one particular state is not able to keep up with that. So does this kind of how does, once again, not going into demand forecasting, but then again in general asking that how do a complete B2B business come up with a structure or a setup where they could service more and more customers, ensuring that their state boundaries or something like that doesn't disrupt their entire chain? Um, is it
I think it depends on a lot of things, right? Let's say, for example, you are sourcing from Asia, right? From China, and and there's so many different strategies here, but let's say your items are less than 5 pounds metric or whatever. um you could ship from Hong Kong or you could ship from China on a dropship basis, and nowadays frankly it could get to your customer in 3 to 5 days, 3 to 5 days, right? So I think that's a solid strategy for those that want to house inventory closer to supply and ship wherever, rest of world. But that doesn't always work out, right? Like if your items are like 50 pounds, then that's probably not the best strategy. So in that use case, you should probably have different inventory in different locations. So now we have, if you're a global company, we used to say back in the day in Shipwire, because most people, when e-commerce first started getting popular, would house inventory either drop ship from China, where majority of products were, or house inventory in one location, which becomes ridiculously expensive as your brand grows. So how do you lower costs? You can cut it by 35% simply by placing inventory, for example, in the UK or in Australia or anywhere closer to your customer. I think that that concept of knowing when to put inventory closer to the customer and knowing when to keep it closer to supply, depending on the weight, the volume, and everything else, is a delicate process. And if you are a cloud-based company, you have an advantage because you have all the data, right? You can make those decisions fairly easily. I think what and I do some consulting as well. And one of the things I see with the younger crowd of guys that want to start businesses, and they come to me, hey, how do we do the supply chain? It's tricky because you also have to know when to order, right? Because you are competing with your manufacturer's minimum order quantities. You're competing with other retailers that are ordering from the same manufacturer. And you're competing with like holidays in other countries where your suppliers are based, right? So there are the timing of your ordering based on your demand, based on where your orders are coming from and where your inventory is. It's a multivariate equation that everything needs to be taken into consideration.
Right. I mean, I think that's a very expansive outlook on the kind of questions we're dealing here, because I think there are so many disruptive changes that have happened just in the last 8 to 9 months compared to the entire 10-year industry that we've seen evolve. So, in a situation like that, obviously, more questions will be raised on the robust ability of the supply chain models, these entire drop shipping and inventory housing, and all those kinds of things. But no, you're right, and thank you so much for going deeper into that. One of the things that I mean, we had prepared a list of questions which we sort of sourced in from our sort of viewers or internal team members, because we also operate in the BTC arena, and
Yeah.
we have these questions that overlap with the ages and industries as well. So we sourced in these questions, and I asked you about the inventory and the warehousing. One of the things now I wanted to go on to the side of scaling. Now,
Yeah.
in scaling a particular B2B, specifically a B2B business, how do you think a company out in, say, March 2020 be looking at for the next 5 years about their sales and marketing channels, and how should they
Yeah.
be coming to the structure like that? What's the right, go-to methods, actionable steps that they should be taking?
I think when we talk about B2B and B2B2C, uh, there's obviously a death in retail, right? It's no longer e-commerce; it's just commerce, right? That's a famous phrase that has gained popularity recently.
Yeah.
Uh, in the use case where I talked about this in the pre, if you're using physical retail and LTL shipments to ship to large department stores, for example, that's obviously a channel that is not, it's not necessarily dead. Countries are opening back up, things are happening, but it's not going to be at the volumes that we relied on as a collective human existence for the past 100 years, right? Uh, if you are a B2B to B2B2C business, obviously you need to look for more demand channels. And there are tools. So for B2B specifically, there are tools and startups that will allow you to streamline your transition. And obviously, for those five things we talked about: inventory management, order management, front end demand, and returns and fulfillment, you can't put that together in a day, right? I mean, you probably could, but it would probably not be great. So instead of having your own team design this layer, there are so many companies that focus on specialized work for each individual part of the stack, and it's easier to deploy when you have companies like DCAP and Cloras that will help you actually stitch all of that together to create this first in class customer experience, right? So my advice is simple: go find a decap, to go find a Clorox to help you select the right vendor partners to put the customer experience stack together.
Right. So I think what you're trying to say here is that it is better to delegate and automate your entire processes rather than
Absolutely.
go ahead and stitch up all these infrastructures from scratch and then hope that they work out the way you want them to, rather than to be having these specialized industries and companies and just delegating them the tasks and just going ahead with your business processes. Another question that
Absolutely.
we wanted to explore with was about demand generation. So we know a bit about forecasting, and that is something that we can look over the data and we can more or less predict how it's going to go down for the next quarter or things like that. But in demand generation, particularly for B2B or B2C businesses right now, where all the time is being spent on social media, there's so much eyeballs on the internet. Where do you think this trend is going to settle down for B2B businesses?
I mean, you said it right. Social media as a customer acquisition channel is a so there's two things here. Just two plays. Social media as an introductory there's, to the customers is a huge thing. But over time, it becomes really expensive, right? The cost of customer acquisition will always go up if you're just using that to acquire customers. There's two other things we need to talk about. It's how do you keep that customer? What's that customer's lifetime value? But also, if we look at the best practices for fast growth ecom, one of the things, if it's B2B or B2C, one of the things that is standardly true is having an owned media channel, which is either email or some kind of blog or whatever. Owned media will over time lower your cost of customer acquisition tremendously. Even if you're spending a ton of money on Facebook ads, you're keeping that customer longer, and that customer is spending more money because you have that media engagement through the email list or through the blog or through the webinars or whatever. So what's becoming increasingly important for customer acquisition is not just outsourcing to an agency and hoping that they can continue to get you new customers, because over time it's just not going to be profitable, right? It's not like your margins will stay at 80% forever and ever and ever, right? Like over time it goes down. What you need to be doing is making sure that you can continue to sell to that same customer over and over and over again, and that they continue to be happy.
Right. So I think it's more about focusing on building a customer loyalty through one particular
Yeah,
channel and then branching out and seeing. I
yeah,
mean, don't test waters with both your feet in it. You need to have
yeah,
one foot on the ground. I
absolutely.
and one of the last things we wanted to explore into with your consulting and knowledge and with the overall general landscape of how the e-commerce business is shaping right now. So there have been two major things that happen. So big commerce partnered with TikTok. That's
Yeah,
one interesting thing that happened. And Apple kind of moved their entire manufacturing and process out of China and just like are spreading it out throughout the Southern Asian continent. So what do you think is the bigger play here? What do you think is how are the dots connecting or coming together for future B2B businesses or the current big B2B giants?
I think you hit the nail on the head. When Apple is really interesting because Apple is by and large a supply chain company, right? And Tim Cook is a the chief supply chain manager, right? So moving from China mainland to the rest of Southeast Asia is obviously a diversification play, which everybody agrees with after what happened. You got the trade wars between the politics of it all and the actual virus and everything else. I think it's a smart move to diversify your supply. I think everybody anywhere will agree with you. And I was talking with young kid, just started a store 18 months ago, doing really well, ordering inventory all the time. All of a sudden, can't get inventory for months and months and months. Store dies. And he's like, now he learned his lesson. He needs to source from other places. He needs to source from India, from Vietnam, from Africa, right? These are Everybody needs to be focused on moving out of China, frankly, and moving into other areas so that you can diversify your supply, but also diversify the quality of your supply. And on the TikTok thing, that's the demand side with big commerce. Those are major moves, right? Like these are obviously, and Shopify, I believe, partnered with TikTok recently as well. Um, I I'm not on TikTok. Just like I can't get into it. But obviously, I'm not the guy that's I still go to the store to go buy stuff. So it's not. I'm not the audience, but at the same time, it's a major move because from a customer acquisition perspective, the eyeballs are insane. So and this is the good demographic. I think what 18 to 21 or something like that. That's buying. They're buying online. I don't know where they're getting this money from, but they're buying online, and their discretionary income is going into the pockets of the big commerce and Shopify stores.
Because I think it's interesting. Sorry, I misspoke. It was not big commerce; it was Shopify, and
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because I've seen more and more influencers trying to push their partnered products with their
Yeah.
advertising or things like that, and they're coming up with dedicated stores. So
Yes.
to be in a space where Logan Paul can sell T-shirts, or some influencer like David Dobrik can sell his own merchandise or things like merchandising has become a really big play for these influencers right now. So they need a place.
I completely agree with you. You brought up a good point, and the truth is, influencers that sell products are now retailers. Like they are the retailer,
Yep.
and depending on the engagement, right? The cost of customer acquisition for the brand is actually lower with the influencer.
Yep.
Again, depending on the engagement, and unless it's like Kim Kardashian and you're spending like $2 million, right? But on average, the micro influencer, the mid market influencer, acts as a fairly cost effective customer acquisition channel, and we see the shift literally. There's an article out from in Vogue yesterday, from an influencer who became this massive person, and she was saying, she was highlighting the fact that you should look at the volumes from like a Neiman Marcus. The shift from the traditional in-store retail to the actual retail that's happening on the micro influencer side is major. That volume is shifting not just to online, but literally to that person's Instagram page, right? And you can track it. So it's a major shift. And I think that moving forward, if you want to scale, and I hate saying this, but it's true, operating without influencers is probably not the best strategy if you want to be alive long term. And that's just the new reality.
No, I think this is something that the big companies are actually picking up on, and they can sense that this is the next shift that is coming in through. So the introduction of Facebook Marketplace or Instagram store, or the Instagram Marketplace or things like that. Now, essentially, Instagram is owned by Facebook, so I think all that habits going to trickle down into the
Right.
sub companies as well. In fact, in India, WhatsApp is being used to make businesses come to life as well. So now that's
Yeah.
again a Facebook company. So I think you're right with the fact that the customer acquisition is high, more attention is available, and then it's happening right at the very touch point of the retailer that is the influencer. So yeah, no, I think that these are the questions we had. I think you really like brilliantly answered them. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
taking out the time. So
Uh, Thank
yes,
you, Chad.
one more question before you go. If we'll be broadcasting this video, we'll be editing it and broadcasting this on all our social medias and things like that. So if anybody of suspecting viewer later wants to reach out to you or connect with you or know you, how can they reach out to you?
Perfect. Let me just drop my email in the chat, but you can reach out to me through my email. It's Jean, Jean dot Francois, Francois at ingrammicro.com. Uh, I'll just drop that. You guys can send that out. Or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Easy to find.
Wonderful. And you're not on social media.
No, it's, Instagram, Facebook. It's too much for me.
I can understand that. So thank you so much for being here, Sean. And I think this has been wonderful. And we hope to see you soon and learn more from you in the future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shai. Thank you. Have a great day.
Have a great day as well.